without being too sciencey or nerdy, like regulation is our ability to kind of maintain balance between a state of calm amidst chaos. So like we are not meant to be calm and regulated 24/7. We are human beings. Our nervous system is brilliant and it's there to protect us for different reasons. We also need some mobilization with our sympathetic to get moving, to get things done. And it's not unhealthy to be in what we would consider a dysregulated state. It's just a matter of how long are we living there? And many of us are chronically stuck there, which is when we'll talk about dysregulation. That's really what I'm speaking to.
Hi, friends. You're listening to Life Intended, a podcast that explores what it means to be true to yourself and live an authentic and purposeful life. I'm your host, Kelly Berry, and each episode of Life Intended explores my guest's version of personal growth, self-discovery, and the pursuit of becoming the best version of themselves so that you can take what you need and incorporate it into your life to live with more intention and authenticity. Whether you're seeking to develop your leadership skills, overcome challenges, or simply live a more fulfilling life, you will find guidance, motivation, and practical strategies to help you navigate your unique journey. Today, I have an amazing expert on the podcast, and I'm really excited for today's conversation. Emily Steines is the founder of BootBod. Her work combines science, spirituality, and somatics to help us disrupt self-sabotaging patterns and step into our true power and aliveness. She has over 15 years of experience as a life and embodiment coach. She's a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, an IIN holistic health coach, an SFG kettlebell trainer, and a breathwork facilitator. Emily's mission is to help you unlock the wisdom and intelligence residing within your body, nervous system, intuition, and unconscious mind, reigniting your true essence and fulfillment. Gosh, Emily, that sounds amazing. I want some of that. Yeah. Welcome to the podcast. I'm like I said, I'm really excited for today's conversation. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm so happy to be here. It's an honor.
Tell us more. I think one thing that I wanted you to talk a little bit about from your bio is how your work combines science, spirituality, and somatics. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Yeah, I would love to. So I originally started in the health and fitness world. So I have a background in a lot of physiology and anatomy and all of that as a personal trainer and yoga teacher and these different things. So I've always been fascinated with kind of our own beings and nerding out on the physiology and the science behind us as humans. And then when I kind of went through my own little bottoms out breaking point, complete burnout hospitalization situation years ago, that's kind of when I really started to reignite this, more of the spirituality element, more of the energetics, more of this, the energy healing, the inner child healing, getting connected to the chakras, essential oils, breath work, unconscious reprogramming, all these different things. So I think it's so important and so fun to combine the facts and the science with a little bit of the energy or the woo, if we want to call it, the spiritual components. And then kind of with that, I also love to layer in the somatics, which is even we talk about today with a lot of the nervous system kind of chat. There's so much wisdom in our being and in our body. And it's kind of a blend of both. It really somatics to me is almost like a blend of the science and the spirituality, because it's very much energy. It's very much the felt experience in the body, but there's so much science in terms of how it actually really supports us when we do that, whether it's how we communicate with our nervous system versus just trying to think a certain way or tell ourselves a certain way. It's also how we connect to our unconscious if we're working to reprogram past beliefs. So I feel like my journey has kind of collected these things along the way, and I like to lump it in those three elements: the science, the spirituality, and the somatics.
Yeah, I love that. So tell us a little bit about your journey. What is your background? How did you get from where you've been to where you are now?
Yeah, so I've always been very connected to movement. Movement for me has always been such a feel good thing. And so I started, whether that was making up dances in my backyard as a kid or, getting into doing, I feel like I remember doing Pilates videos on my DVR way back in the day with my sister in the living room. So like movement's always been a really big thing for me. And so when I went to college, I leaned in and I majored in health and physiology and health promotion track, and they started personal training. I got my yoga certification. So I was really kind of diving into that world of not just my self-loving movement and fitness, but being able to share it. And I it was really interesting. I also was, one of my majors in undergrad was dance. And I did that because I loved to dance. And I wasn't necessarily thinking I was going to become a professional dancer, but it just felt like a fun thing to continue. And so it was like the combination of the pressure of the world of dance, which has ballet and body image and all the things that come along with it, paired with the world of personal training and like fat loss and bikini bods and these fads that were happening, not even fads, but just like where the focus was very physique focused and just external appearance focused. It really kind of like sucked me out of my initial joy of movement. Like I genuinely liked to move. And then I was realizing and seeing and witnessing and even kind of, innocently like playing into it as a personal trainer and meeting with people that have all these specific goals of I want to lose belly fat, I want to lose blah, 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 like focusing on that. And so it was kind of like an awakening for me, even in that of like, wait a second, why am I doing this? And is this what I want to be doing? But still committing to it and leaning in. And I was also I've been from birth, I think a people pleaser. I've also been a very intuitive little nugget since a young age. And so really being able to perceive other people's energy and their needs, and then me wanting to make sure everyone's good and feeling okay. So getting really good at kind of over giving and having zero boundaries. So eventually with all of these roles and in training, and I was working 4 jobs, I got to this point where like my body literally shut down and I was hospitalized. So that was for me like this wake up call, or kind of my own little breaking point, if you will, of checking into not just my own schedule and how I'm leading my life in terms of overcommitting, but also recognizing at what my responsibility is in terms of what roles I'm playing in terms of supporting people, knowing that I love to teach and I love to train, I love to do all these things. It's like, where do I fall in a way that isn't also perpetuating the same narrative of like hustle mode and grind mode always, and kick your butt in the gym and don't nourish yourself and restrict eating these things, and kind of that same narrative that was being pumped out at that time. So for me, that was my wake up call of kind of not only coming home to myself, I was very disconnected from myself. I was very dysregulated. Talk about nervous system state. I was very dysregulated. I was very like in an almost dissociative space, kind of chronically, of just going through the motions and not aware of my body's needs, cues, signals at all. And my body then was like, hello, we are shutting down to show you. Hello, we're trying to talk to you for years even. I was doing the most insane like work schedule for almost 5 years. It's amazing what our bodies are capable of. And eventually they'll let us know if something's up. So that was my moment. And from there, that's when I kind of started to dive more deeply into meditation and breath work and the energy work and the chakras and breath work. I said breath work, unconscious reprogramming, essential oils, like more of that world, the somatic healing, and started to really take on the responsibility of like not wanting to play the same role of perpetuating that we have to look a certain way, we have to show up a certain way, there's a cookie cutter approach to how we live, and that it really gets to be this holistic approach based on connecting to ourselves, understanding ourselves more deeply, and kind of getting out of our own way and into our power in all these different modalities. And that's evolved over the years with my business, but that's kind of a not very brief summary of how I got to where I am.
So I have a few questions. When you got to the point of hospitalization and you were kind of, we'll just say recovery, because I'm sure there was a lot of work that had to be done. Were you aware in the moment of what led you to that point? Or how did you figure out that you were dissociated, that you were dysregulated? When did that awareness kind of come about for you?
Such a lovely question. And I don't think I was that aware right away. I
Mm-hmm.
don't feel like it hit. I mean, there was a like smack in the face kind of energy from the hospitalization of just simply from the fact of noticing like this deep sense of anxiety in me of when I literally couldn't go work and do all the things I was doing and feeling like I was letting the world down and feeling like I was letting my bosses down and my clients down and all these things because I technically, literally, physically could not do it. So having to reckon with that of being like, okay, wait a second, like I am unwell right now. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay that I take a break and take time off. So there was some energy and some awareness around me actually kind of looking myself in the mirror a little bit and recognizing how much of my own energy I was putting outside of myself and totally neglecting myself. But when it came to being able to articulate that it was dissociation or this dysregulation of my nervous system or all that, that was something that I continued to kind of like uncover as I did more of the work, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I was literally, as I said, living so dissociated and so disconnected from my body. So it's kind of hard to even be able to name that until we actually know what it's like to connect to our body and like
Yeah.
actually be here in the moment in my being and feel the feels and understand what my needs are and all of that for me to be able to know like, oh, and that was a whole different experience before. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there were pieces of it that kind of came up right away and there was some awareness, but a lot of it kind of, the ahas kind of unfolded as I continue to actually prioritize myself in a way that I really wasn't before
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I think it's important to highlight that because I think that for people who are, pushing up against this wall that you were pushing up against or are feeling like something's just not right, to know that like it's okay to not know exactly what's not right in the moment, that it's probably going to take some work and some figuring out and some slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all part of the process. Like any good thing, it just takes time. But I think for a lot of people who are go, 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 like we want an answer. We want to know like what's going on? How can I fix it? How can I get back to this life? When in fact the answer is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. And the other thing, and this is kind of like tangent, on the side. We'll go with that. So I'm also come from the fitness world, but fitness business. We're coaching fitness business owners on how to run successful fitness businesses. And, the things that you are talking about with like the mindset and the messaging and everything around fitness, we're not talking about 30 years ago or 20 years ago. We're talking about like 15, 12, 10, even less than years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was about body transformation and losing fat and getting fit and pushing your limits. And I think that I am really happy to see it evolving into a more holistic movement where there are a lot of things outside of just movement that are important. So sleep, mental health, all of these things to make sure that you are not just healthy, but, or I guess not just like reaching whatever aesthetic goals that you have, but you're also reaching whatever goals you have to feel good in your life, in your body. And I really like that. So I'm really interested in like the somatic healing and all the things that we're about to talk about, the dysregulation. But just to kind of support that point that you were talking about, it has not been that long ago that all of the messaging was, basically get as lean as possible, as skinny as possible, don't look anything like yourself, and get as unhealthy as you possibly can on your journey to look a certain way.
Yeah.
And, I think that I'll also preface this with, I think like whatever aesthetic goals you have for yourself are fine. Like it's important to be like true to yourself and what is going to make you happy. But it's also important to really like check in and see why those are the things that you want. Are those the things that you want? Are those the things that you think you should want? And there's a lot
Exactly.
of like layers to that, as I'm sure you know, but just another kind of reinforcing point to what you lived.
So true. Yeah. I mean, I'm so grateful to see how far we've come in the last, decade or so. And I don't think we're fully there yet, but it's leaps and bounds different, and with the messaging out there, even with like people that have more influence or celebrities, or there's still some toxic stuff. There's also some really beautiful references of body positivity, or at least body neutrality and that kind of thing. And I'm with you. Like, I don't think wanting to lose weight or build muscle or like change your physique is inherently unhealthy or wrong. I think it's when we kind of abandon ourselves in the process of reaching that goal, when it becomes really scary, toxic, and can be very unhealthy. And so like being able, like you're saying, like checking in and being more mindful of all parts of us, not just that exterior part of us, when we're taking that journey, I think is really important. It's also how we can sustain any changes and shifts that we do allow for ourselves too.
Yeah, for sure. So the thing that I really want to get into and talk to you about is this dysregulation that you mentioned. So tell us what is dysregulation first, so that people can understand. And I'm sure people have like their own interpretation, but tell us like what it is, and then why are we all so dysregulated?
Yeah. It's such, it might be just the bubble I live in, but I feel like there's so much information out there right now about regulating your nervous system, regulation, dysregulation. So for anyone that's not familiar or seeing that, but not knowing what it is, I actually want to start with like what regulation is before even going to like the dysregulation. Like regulation, without being too sciencey or nerdy, like regulation is our ability to kind of maintain balance between a state of calm amidst chaos. So like, we are not meant to be calm and regulated 24/7. We are human beings. Our nervous system is brilliant, and it's there to protect us for different reasons. We also need some mobilization with our sympathetic to get moving, to get things done. And it's not unhealthy to be in what we would consider a dysregulated state. It's just a matter of how long are we living there? And many of us are chronically stuck there, which is when we'll talk about dysregulation. That's really what I'm speaking to. But when we're in a regulated state, it's kind of like our baseline, or ideally our baseline of feeling safe in our body, able to connect to our body, able to know what we're feeling, able to actually be present with ourselves and the world. Like, think about if you're, in a high stress state, or you're going into an interview, whatever, and you're having a conversation with somebody, and it's like, you can't even like really take in what they're saying because you're so worried about what you're going to say, because you're kind of in that like heightened kind of autopilot, like ready to just laser focused mode. So regulation is the opposite. It's like, so think about the people that feel so safe and delicious to be around, like your best friend or your family members, where you can just like, just melt into the couch and have a lovely, juicy conversation, right? That would be a regulation state. Also, like the why it matters or what it looks like, emotional well-being. So being able to actually know what we're feeling and actually have feelings, move through our feelings, not just shove them down or dissociate or numb or pretend everything's fine when we're not so fine. That is a huge piece of it. It's also so important. Regulation is so important for our physical health. So it helps things like our immune system. It helps our digestion and gut health. It helps us sleep better. It helps even your hormone regulation, less inflammation in the body. There's a lot of recovery from our workouts. There's a lot of benefits physically, mentally. We have more clarity. We're able to problem solve and think straight. We're able to actually like connect to our knowing, our own intuition around making big decisions versus feeling, stressed around making decisions based on others' expectations or what we quote unquote should be doing, and then our relationships. Like if we are regulated, we're able to really, again, not only connect to ourselves and our relationship with ourselves, but feel like we can maintain healthy relationships because we have that state of safety in our body, which allows us to have a knowing around like, oh, wait, this doesn't feel good. Maybe I need to set a boundary here. Or like, ooh, these people, maybe I don't want to spend as much time with. So we also have a better, deeper understanding of maybe what relationships feel good and how to navigate relationships when we are coming from a regulated state. So I just want to kind of like preface this dysregulated conversation with like what regulation gets to feel like and what it is. But dysregulation is like, why are we also dysregulated? I mean, chronic stress, right? We live in a world where it is still a bit of that hustle, grind, go, go, go mode. Achievements is like winning, no rest, no sleep. You ask people, how are you doing? You're like, oh, I'm so busy, right? That's like our default setting still. And it's almost celebrated, right? It's like, it's almost celebrated in a way. Whereas if you were saying like, oh, things are good. I had a nap today, or I went to a yoga class. Not saying that's realistic for all of our schedules, but that would almost be deemed as like, wow, you didn't do that much today, right? Like we have different lenses for these things. So the chronic stress that we face in terms of just societal expectations, or if you're a mom or a parent, having responsibilities for other kiddos and the stress that comes with that, could be stress from other family members that are sick, or your own illness or injuries, like just having chronic stress in general in our life, and not being equipped to know how to support ourselves with that stress. So chronic stress is a huge one. Information overload, again, kind of along with the chronic stress, we are constantly stimulated and bombarded with information, with every news source, with everyone's lives on social media, with just, let alone our day-to-day world, right? And the responsibilities of people texting us, or what you need to have it's Spirit Week at school, and how do you need to dress your kid that day? Like whatever the information is, it's just overload. We are constantly overwhelmed. And we are also in a world right now where it's very foreign to our ancestors in terms of really being, I put in quotes, available, because really we don't need to be available, but we kind of act as if we are supposed to be available 24/7. And so recognizing that, and that is contributing to the stress and this overload. And then more deeply, like the dysregulation coming from our own trauma. And even if you didn't experience like big T trauma or abuse, as a kiddo, we all have our own trauma. We were all unmet in some way, and misattuned to, or, experience things that didn't quite feel like a fit for us, but didn't have the support in processing it or understanding it on an emotional level. And so we're still carrying that stuff with us, and it's still contributing to how we're showing up today. So a big piece of that is also contributing to our dysregulation and our state of being. And then lastly is just like the lack of knowledge. Like I wish that we were taught about our nervous system in school, like as a kid. I wish we were equipped with understanding it's our body, it's our vessel, it's our protective system. It is genius. And it's also most likely operating based on what is our perceived threats versus actual threats, very innocently. But the lack of knowledge and the lack of understanding and the lack of the resources or even the tools to practice regulation, I think is also deeply contributing to why we're all so dysregulated.
Yeah. You said so many amazing things in there. And I'll add a couple that some other guests have talked about, because I think it just kind of brings a lot of things full circle. But one of them is, and I think this would align with your information overload, because I know this is for sure a source of dysregulation for me, the news. I had a guest say, we are not made to live in a global news cycle. We are like creatures who are born to be in villages, and we're only really equipped to handle the things in our immediate circle. And so when we turn on the news and we are exposed to tragedies and things that are happening all over the world, whether it's, war or environmental or whatever, but, being exposed to so much suffering is really, really, really detrimental to our nervous system and how we're feeling. So I think, I don't want people to overlook that. I think that there are a lot of ways, and maybe we'll talk about these, that we can make adjustments so that we can protect ourselves a little bit more. So I think that one is really valid. And then the other one that I was just like thinking and smiling about, because this has been a topic of conversation with a couple of people recently, is feeling and emotions and understanding what your emotions are and being able to label them, and like when you're feeling something, sitting with it and like being curious about it. Why am I feeling this way? And go deeper, because most likely it's not the first thing that you're feeling. The first thing that you're feeling is more of like the nervous system acting in a way that it should, like protection. But that doesn't give you actionable feedback to then go and take action on. So that's something I definitely want to get more into is how do you do that? How do you recognize emotions or name them or use them even to help you then go to the root and like get to work on the problem? So there's a lot of good stuff in there. That's what I'm trying to say.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. And back to the news, like, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm someone like, I don't want to be ignorant or I want to still be informed around what's going on. But I have really big boundaries around watching the news. I have a set little window where I check like a news source, whether it's an app or a website, or there's a podcast that I listen to that kind of gives you like a quick update of what's going on, that I will have. That's my little window. And if it brings up feels and sadness or, you know, fear or whatever, because again, I'm a big feeler as a human about what's happening in the world, I will let myself have that time to like be in it and feel it. And then that's my contained space. And I go back to life, as opposed to always having the news on in the background or kind of constantly getting notifications from news sources on my phone. Like I have really big boundaries around that. And I think it's a really important one for sure, because it's a lot of energy to take in and receive.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, and
I love
we're
that.
in the middle of, you know, it's an election year. We're less than a month from the election. It is unavoidable, really. And it's divisive and there's all kinds of things to be said about it. But yeah, I think that just stopping and being aware of how is this making me feel? How is this affecting me? Is this contributing to my chronic stress? Which I would guess for a lot of people it is, because it is so divisive and, you know, just basically made to make us feel big feelings, be polarized, and just awareness, I think, around all of that is really important, because you can't really live in a bubble, but you can't also just be completely available to everything all the time. So some kind of balance.
You can't be a sponge for all of it all the time. It's no good. Yeah. It's so important for sure.
So talk about, I think you mentioned there are like 3 things that we're basically all doing all the time to stay in the state of dysregulation. What are those 3 things?
Yeah. I want to name 2 in case it's not clear or there's some lack of familiarity around the dysregulation. We have like there's really 3 states, but there's 2 main states that we'll talk about, but there's sympathetic. That's what we know as our fight or flight. That's like the I have to energy, kind of a sense of urgency, or I got to get things going, or maybe some anxiety, or maybe irritability and that type of energy. And so like knowing if we're in that, there's probably some sort of restlessness, like again, urgency, anxious feelings, maybe panic or fear, could be the anger or the irritability, oftentimes tension. Like I always give the example of like you're driving and someone pulls out in front of you, you like tighten up and like your heart starts racing until you realize like, okay, everything's fine. Or if we don't give ourselves that moment to take a breath, we might stay in that tense place for however many blocks driving down or how many miles driving down the road. There's also this element of like hypervigilance. So, you know, just this kind of like state of worry or state of hyper focus on our environment or what's going on or what people are doing or what I need to be doing. And it can also contribute to insomnia or struggle sleeping, because we're basically, think about your system is in overdrive. Your system is like overactive. And so for you to actually fall asleep or stay asleep or have sound sleep, it's kind of like this like this like buzzing state that you're living in. So lack of sleep would be very common. So that's a big one. There's also a freeze state, which a lot of times they're clumped together, like fight, flight, freeze, right? But fight or flight is sympathetic. And then we have our dorsal vagal, which is kind of our shut down, kind of numb out, dissociative, no motivation, just everything powers down mode. And our freeze state is actually between those 2. So the freeze state is like the sense of urgency inside, anxiety inside. Oh my God, I have so much to do, or I need to be doing that, or I want to be doing this. But like outside or in terms of what we're actually doing and how we're showing up, we're like stuck in time, frozen, not actually doing. There's no movement forward, no progress, or not as much as we know we are capable of. And then past that is just that like shutdown mode, both internally and externally. And that's like overwhelming fatigue and just exhaustion. Could be that numbness, fogginess, again, dissociative, kind of just like out of body, not fully here, experience. Even a depressed state is really commonly felt in terms of the state of
Mm-hmm.
dysregulation, feeling really isolated and alone and like very separate, like you don't feel connected, not only to yourself, but you don't feel connected to others or the world. So those are all some very hopefully tangible examples of like what dysregulation can feel like. So when it comes to, I feel like there's so many I could rattle off in terms of like the things that we're doing every day that kind of perpetuates it. But if I were to simplify it, I think the first one is lack of boundaries. So the boundaries, and I know that's like everyone talks about boundaries, but it really is so important. So when I go back to this state of we're all living in chronic stress and a state of overwhelm and all of this stimuli and all of this energy coming at us and responsibilities and needs and available 24/7 and having all this news coming at us. If we don't have our own boundaries, it is going to feel extremely challenging to ever get to a state of safety, regulation, presence, calm, connection to ourselves. So I think the lack of boundaries and just the lack of even being able to check in with what our boundaries are needed. We could have a whole another long conversation on just boundaries, but the boundaries being like for your own self, like I gave you the example of like what I do for myself within my taking in news information. It could also be a boundary around not taking on any, stopping work at this time, especially as an entrepreneur, right? Like we could work all day, every day and have no boundaries in terms of our work life. So having boundaries in terms of I start my work day at this time, I end my work day at this time, and having solid boundaries there. So really connecting to yourself, your own boundaries around like your movement or your own, self-care practices, mindfulness practices. What does that look like? And how often are you doing it, right? Boundaries, obviously, in terms of relationships, boundaries in your physical space, in terms of maybe like you setting aside separate space for you to have that's just yours, that's not in the mix of the family, so you can actually feel like you can get away and land and ground if that's available to you. So boundaries can come in a lot of different ways. It's not always like, I think often people think it's like telling you like a boundary when like a relationship is having a rupture of some kind, which that's very common, but boundaries can come in all shapes, sizes, forms, and come in all different aspects or apply to all different aspects of our life. So connecting to where I might need a boundary. And the biggest signal for a boundary being needed is when we start to get irritable, angry, frustrated. Usually that's our body's, our emotional reaction to some line being crossed. And so if we're starting to feel that anger, frustration, annoyance, whatever, we could slow down and actually check in and be like, okay, what about this person? What about today? What about in general and what's happening in my life that might be contributing to this emotional state? And it could be you're taking on too many responsibilities. So you're saying yes to too many things. It could be this person is talking to you in a very kind of pokey, judgmental way that's a no for you. I won't be talked to like that. Let's step away. If you're willing to talk to me when you can talk to me with more grace and compassion, then I'll be here for that. So recognizing, again, that irritability, anger, frustration, those are typically the best little signals for like, oh, a boundary might be needed here. So boundaries is number one, in my opinion. The second one is living, again, which I'm so guilty of. I did it for many years, but living so disconnected, right? Like we are kind of allowing ourselves in our everyday lives to just go through the motions on autopilot. So this like numbing out or avoiding the self, I will say. So maybe avoiding actually checking into how we're feeling, avoiding maybe doing some sort of inner work, inner child healing, maybe if that's a fit for you, avoiding slowing down, avoiding giving yourself space to just sit in silence, maybe try meditation or breath work, like avoiding the self and avoiding actually connecting to yourself. And I hear from a lot of people in this work that sometimes there's fear, like it's easier to just like push myself away and do what I got to do because I don't know what I'm going to find if I actually slow down. So there can be some fear in that, and that makes sense. That's human. And at the same time, it's usually a lot less scary than you think it's going to be. And that it actually gets to deeply support you long term, and that you avoiding your feelings or avoiding certain situations or whatever trauma, avoiding anything, it doesn't mean it goes away. I think we can all understand that in these situations, right? It just kind of like festers, or it's going to like pop out in different ways at some point.
Mm-hmm.
It bubbles up. So I think that's a huge piece of kind of our own role in our everyday lives is one, just being aware of like, okay, yeah, I'm really numbing out. I wake up, I scroll my phone, I go to work, I come home, scroll my phone, go to bed, right? Like when was there a moment for you to check in with you? Right. And that kind of goes into my third one, which is the constant simulation again, talking about that constant, like we're constantly getting feedback. We're constantly receiving information. We're constantly being reached out to by people. We're constantly seeing things on social media. And so the lack of stillness, the lack of mind, body, soul presence. And that doesn't have to always be silence, right? Even I'm somebody that used to like feel so uncomfortable with silence. And now I crave it. It's like, I want literally zero, like if I do meditations, like of course I'll still do guided meditations here and there, but often I'm just sitting in silence and it feels like the most nourishing thing for me, which has not been the case for me my whole life. But recognizing that this stillness piece, and actually like not having anything coming in. So I always give the example of like going for a walk, but not playing your podcast right away or not playing a playlist right away, or music. Like maybe you start and just give yourself the first 5 minutes where you just notice your surroundings and you just walk in silence. And then if you want to start your podcast, your playlist, because that brings you joy, amazing. But maybe giving yourself these little pockets of nothing, no input coming at you to give you the space to actually know what's happening in your body, recognize thoughts that are going through your mind, recognizing, again, going back to the emotions, recognizing how you're feeling that day, recognizing maybe an idea surfaces that you wouldn't have surfaced if you were been distracted by all these other things. So those are very like nuanced and detailed, but I would say like the lack of boundaries, the very disconnected kind of living in a numbed out state, and then the lack of actually curating pockets of stillness in our life and kind of just constantly being in this perpetual taking in information from the outside mode are probably the three big ones that are contributing in our everyday lives.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Just listening to you talk about all of them. Do you find that people, especially with this slowing down or stopping, do you feel like people just avoid that like the plague?
Yeah, totally. I think it because it's foreign and and anything that's not our norm or not familiar is uncomfy, right? When we're and even think about like kiddos these days that have literally not experienced life without devices. The idea of, unless we're weaving that in as their parents or caretakers or at school, if it is extremely foreign, and anything again that's not our norm, it's outside of our comfort zone, it's going to feel uncomfortable. So that's also why there's a lot of that narrative around meditation of like, I can't meditate, or like meditation's not for me. My brain just goes crazy and my brain never shuts off. It's like, well, your brain, one, is not meant to shut off. It's meant to think. It's a meaning maker. But what you get to do in meditation is just like sit with and notice those thoughts as they come and go. Like just like being like almost like an outsider's view of just witnessing it without attaching, without trying to judge it, just like letting it happen. Right. But also if our brain isn't shutting off, it's because it's used to constantly being stimulated. Right. So I think it does feel really hard. And I think it does feel like a big roadblock for people. And going back to my experience, that was my experience too, of like, oh, it's not for me. Like, I'm just like I'm a mover and a shaker, and I just like to go and do things all the time, like sitting in stillness, just not for me. And now the more that I've practiced it, again, the more that I crave it. Not saying that's everyone's journey, but there's so much that we get to discover and feel about ourselves and learn and actually know is possible for us. Like when we're constantly living in a stimulated thinking state, we don't even know how good it could feel to like take let some of that slow down and actually like know what it feels like to be in our body versus like a shell of our body, or just focusing so much on everything going on outside of us. And so, yeah, I think there's a big block there because it's not the most familiar thing and because we don't practice it.
Yeah. It's something that people will hear, oh, meditation's good for you, and they'll try it, like 2 times to your
Mm-hmm.
point, they'll say it's not for me or I can't stick with it. But like anything, it needs to be a habit. You've got to incorporate it and kind of give it a chance to work. I'm not a big meditator. I have tried. Here I am saying the same thing. I've tried, but what I have done, I will say, ever since I've had my daughters, like I have slowed way down the pace of our life. Our life just looks totally different now, for a lot of different reasons, like post-pandemic and all of that. But the pace of our life, like the presence that I have with her, that's really where I get some of the things that you're talking about, like the time to just sit and notice and observe, and both like her and myself. How am I
Mm-hmm.
reacting? How am I feeling? So that's kind of where I'm practicing that now. But the other thing that you said that I'll just like totally agree with, and one of the main reasons that I started the podcast is this like autopilot and dissociation. I think myself included, so many people I know just don't even know who they are anymore. They
Mm-hmm.
haven't stopped in years to think about what they like to do, what's important to them, what makes them happy. Are they happy? Why are they doing the things that they're doing? And I
Yeah.
think that is just so sad, and is probably one of like the simplest behavior changes that you can make to kind of like figure out who you are, and start to like shift your life back to one of more intention, one of more like purpose, and really feel authentic. So I love that was part of your list of things, because I think it is so absolutely true that we're just going from thing to thing to thing. We're putting, especially us as women, putting our children and our families and our work and everything ahead of us, and what may be important. And I think maybe just like taking an audit of, what are you doing that you like to do? Are you doing anything that you like to do? What did you used to like to do that you
Mm-hmm.
don't have in your life at all anymore? And can you bring any of those things back in even the like simplest form to just
Yeah.
reconnect with like what actually brings you joy?
Yes to all of that. I think there's so much there that to help people because it is something we're so disconnected from. But like the two questions I like to offer are just literally, what do I need and what do I want? You can ask yourself that once a day. You could ask yourself that on the hour, every hour. And it could be as simple as like, I want some water. I'm thirsty. Great
Yeah.
way to connect with yourself and actually know that you have gone maybe X number of hours without drinking, or maybe recognizing that your cup's actually empty and having that moment of presence with yourself. Or it could be something deeper and bigger in terms of like the grandiose aspect of your life and the vision of where you want to go. It could be deeper than that. But those questions I find, especially for women, and again, especially for moms, I work a lot with moms, that it feels like, oh, I literally don't even know how to answer that. I don't know what I need and I don't know what I want. And then piggybacking off of that, like going back to the recognizing what feels accessible, I also like to invite in, like, what's the desired feeling? Like if you know that things aren't feeling great right now, but you don't necessarily want to spend the time to dive into more of the inner work or shifting your whole life upside down, like what feeling maybe is lacking? Is it patience? Is it joy? Is it a sense of play? Is it just feeling content and being okay even though life is a whirling craziness? Like, what's that word? And then with that specific feeling or that state of being, can you come up with one, two, maybe make a list in your phone of things that would allow you to feel that, even just like a glimmer of that, right, in that moment. And I think going back to what you were saying too about your presence with your daughter, of being, when you're playing, when it's playtime, it's just you and her, and you're witnessing her, and you're there, and you're not on your phone, and you're having that moment of presence and play. And that could be a lot of these examples. Again, it could be the presence. It could be a sense of patience, like being patient, knowing that you have other things to do, but you're going to sit with her and be present. It could be a sense of play that you're feeling. So coming up with your own very realistic things that maybe you're already doing or easy things that feel really accessible to add in. When it comes to kind of, when we talk about this nervous system regulation, we never want to feel like we have to go from 0 to 100. Like we want to go from 0 to 1, like 0 to 2. So finding the next, we call it the next tolerable action, the next tolerable step. Like, don't think you have to jump and go take a 180. Like, let yourself take a baby step forward and have it feel really accessible and really bite-sized. And going back to what you mentioned with meditation, of like, you've tried it, it might not be a fit for you. There's so many different ways and forms of meditation that aren't sitting in silence like I love to do, or sitting and listening to a guided meditation. It could be going for a walk and being super present and just witnessing the colors and what you're seeing, or noticing just literally being outside in nature. It could be a moving meditation, right? Whether that's in your yoga practices, or you're having a little dance party and just like being mindful and present in your body as you're moving and grooving and, having a little grand old time. It could be while you're cooking, right? There's different forms of meditation that really come down to like presence, like being in the moment. And being, what I think a huge element of meditation is just that free of judgment. So releasing any judgment and releasing any attachment of how things are supposed to go, or if I did it right. Like, if we can just be present with what is happening and releasing any judgment, like, you're meditating. So it can look a lot of different ways. So again, when it comes to these like baby steps or taking actions in ways that could support you, recognizing that what would work for you is not going to be the same thing that works for me or Kelly or, anyone else listening to this. Like, you really get to make it your own. And that's why having these slowing down moments or checking with your needs or knowing how you're feeling is so important, because otherwise we're most likely just going to do what Jane down the street's doing, right? Because we're like, it's working for her, I should just try that. And there can be some trial and error to figure it out. But I think we are such unique individual humans that we really get to honor that. And I will never be someone that says everyone should be doing this exact thing and it works for everybody. There's no cookie cutter plan for anybody. And the last thing I want to say really quickly about meditation is, if you've tried it and it doesn't feel like a fit for you, and you haven't tried breath work, I would invite you to try breath work. Breath work can be a really beautiful opportunity for a meditative state, be kind of in a state of presence. But it's giving you something to consciously think about and actively do. Like, you're breathing in a certain way at a certain pace and timing. So you can't really fully get floaty and distracted and kind of have your mind go all over, because you're really doing something intentional. But it's deeply serving your nervous system and creating presence and safety in your body, assuming you're doing more regulating or kind of calming practices. So that could be something to try if you're feeling called to lean back in, but there's still some resistance around just straight up meditation. Breath work could be a good fit.
Yeah. Well, I know we're like getting close to time, and I feel like I have 1,000 more questions that I want to ask you, but I'll keep it to like 2. I think we'll see how this goes. It may just end up being 1. But what about how your subconscious plays into your regulation or dysregulation, or I think I even said re-regulation? Like, how does it play into that, and how do you like recognize when it's impacting you?
Yeah, it's like something I'm so passionate about talking about, because I don't feel like our unconscious or subconscious mind and regulation are often talked about together. At least I haven't seen it, but it feels so important to know the correlation between the two. When we think about our conscious versus unconscious, or conscious versus subconscious mind, I always like to give the example of like the iceberg. Like, if you see an iceberg, the very tip that's coming out of the water, think of that as your conscious mind. That's like our conscious thoughts and choices, and or saying affirmations, or saying like, I'm going to go to the store today. It's that piece of us. What's under the water, that huge mass that's under the surface, this iceberg, is our unconscious mind, which is so much of our being. It's our trauma, it's our patterns, it's our belief system, it's our memories, it's our dream state, it's our intuition. There's so many pieces that make up our unconscious. And so knowing that that's the bulk of our mind, that's really what's kind of quote unquote running the show for us. So we may be somebody like, I want to move my body 3 times a week, or I am worthy, right? Like these affirmations that we say, but it might not actually be connecting to our unconscious, because there might be something in our programming, in our unconscious mind, that is being like, no, that's not true. You aren't worthy because of X, Y, and Z, or because like you may say you want to work out, but there might be a fear around actually getting in shape and feeling strong and confident. Like that's too much. You're going to be too much. You can't show up in this big, beautiful, radiant way. There might be things happening in your unconscious that are overriding whatever you may be wanting or telling yourself consciously. So I think that first is just important to know. And then when it comes to that connection with regulation, a nervous system and our unconscious, they're both formed in our earliest years of life. So I like to think of our little selves. There's understandings, I like to say from anywhere from birth to 5 years old, specifically, especially with the work I do with source code, which is a whole beautiful practice and modality that I use in one-on-one coaching, very much connected to our unconscious. But there's also studies that show it's up to 7 years, unconscious mind up to 14 years of life. But just think like adolescence, childhood and adolescence. And for our nervous system, we're like sponges. We don't have the consciousness to be able to be like, oh, well, that may be happening to me, but it's not happening to her. So I can see maybe there's a different situation here. We're just sponges. So we're just absorbing the energy from our environments, from what we're being told, from what we're being taught, from what's being modeled, whether that's from our parents, whether that's how we're interacting, whether it's what we do in order to feel connected to our family system, or how we get attention, or how we might feel loved, or what things are getting us in trouble. So we're just taking in all this information and understanding like, what's safe, what's not safe for me to do, how do I feel connected and loved. There's other things we can tap into there, but like the bulk of our being is formed in those early years of life, both for our unconscious mind and our nervous system. And then moving forward, they're both functioning in the exact same way. So we're all, whatever age you are, body, but with a little young child internal world, right? Internal landscape. Unless we do this work and we start to shift things and reclaim and reorient ourselves and reprogram our mind. But we're really functioning in that same way. So the way that we view ourselves, the way we view others, the same stories that maybe we were told about ourselves or about finances or men, or, it could be a million things that we understand it as a kid based on what we've experienced that is playing out as an adult. So when we know that, we can do a few things about it. So one, the regulation and the showing of your body that you're safe is huge. And I think doing so when you're already maybe feeling somewhat regulated, like when you're not when you're in a heightened state being the first time you try a regulating process. Not that it's not going to hurt you, but you might not feel as successful at it as then when you're having like a fairly chill, maybe Saturday, and you decide I'm going to try a breath practice today, right? Like starting to strengthen that muscle when things are going okay, when you're feeling nothing's too heightened in you, so that when stressors arise, you can turn back to those tools, or your body you can show yourself that you're safe versus it feeling like it's out of sorts. I could go through, I feel like I want to give so many examples to make it land. But I think common ones are, our ability to use our voice and not feeling like we can speak up, whether that's in a work meeting, whether that's with a family member, whether it's a partner, because we don't want to either make them mad or we don't want to seem too confident, or there could be different stories around using our voice. And so if that's what we learned as a kid, like just be a good girl, don't talk, don't make a peep, just sit in the corner, play by yourself while the adults are doing their adult things. As an adult, we might still find ourselves kind of tampering our voice or diminishing our voice, or not speaking our truth, or not sharing our opinions, or not telling people what we need and want, and just allowing everyone to walk over us or people please, etc. So it can really play out in different ways. So we can also start to see those patterns. Just another way we can dive into the work of healing both these parts is understanding your own patterns. Like, oh yeah, I continue to find myself in either relationships with emotionally unavailable people, whether that's romantic or friendships or work. I continue to, have all these desires and all these dreams, but like I never take action. Like it's like there's just like a big block around me getting to have what I want or move closer to the things that actually excite me. Interesting. Good to know. So most likely it's connected to something from in your unconscious mind, and also connected to your nervous system in terms of what that younger version of you felt safe or allowed to have, be, or do. So looking at the patterns, practicing regulating resources when you're actually feeling somewhat regulated are also great. And then more of the somatic work, which is so important. You were kind of alluding to that earlier when you shared some insights from other guests that you've had of the feelings, recognizing what feeling you're having and actually letting yourself sit with it. There's so many different ways to incorporate somatics, but that's I think a really simple one you can do on your own is like noticing like, oh my God, my heart's racing. Whew, I'm feeling really anxious right now, and not feeling like you need to get out of it right away. I mean, depending on where you're at and it's safe for you to be in a state where you can drop in, but not being like, you're fine, everything's fine, and trying to talk yourself out of it. Again, that's coming from our conscious mind. You're trying to tell yourself you're safe, but your whole big iceberg under the water, your whole being is basically screaming like, not safe, not safe. This is scary. We're not okay. Right. So instead of just saying you're okay, it's like telling someone to relax when they're stressed out or like heightened. It just doesn't work. We get to just be with it. Right. I also like to think of our emotional body, any emotions that are coming up, as being like our little selves, inner child, if you will, if you have any experience with inner child work. So just noticing like, okay, wow, my heart is racing so much. I feel like there's an elephant sitting on my chest. My heart is like, literally, I can feel it pounding onto my chest, and just like sitting with that and just being with it, not trying to change it, not trying to do anything, just like noticing it and being with it. And the magic that often happens if we just let ourselves sit and be in it is that it passes, right? Like it doesn't mean everything's rainbows and butterflies moving forward, depending on what stressor is happening in your world. But we can actually honor the emotion that's coming up. And like you were saying too, there might be something below the surface that's giving us information. Maybe there's sadness underneath there. Maybe there's anger underneath there. Maybe there's another emotion as we like sit with it that surfaces that we can know about, that gives us insight into what's going on in our world and maybe what we need. But it also is creating an opportunity for you to move that emotion. Our emotions are emotion, energy, and motion. They are meant to be processed and moved. They are not meant to be, you're fine, just shove it down. That's not the most supportive thing we can do for ourselves. So I think that would be the other element of the feeling your feels. And then there's, again, so many different ways to practice somatic experiencing and kind of embodiment rituals. But I'm hopeful that gives like some tangible way of being able to connect to the unconscious. And then the other thing this is what I do in my one-on-ones, right? In my coaching. So if anyone's like, I'll try these, but I would love some more insight, or I want someone else that maybe can see things that I can't see, because it can be hard when we're living in that story, we're living in that world. We have blinders on in a lot of ways. It can be really hard to see our own stuff. So that could be another opportunity of getting some support in knowing more about your unconscious and being able to kind of shift and dissolve the old patterns and be able to reclaim what else is possible for you too.
Yeah.
Woo, that was a long answer.
that was amazing. I'll also say on the feelings and like allowing yourself to feel, I think that for a lot of us that have a lot of emotions, or have for a long time, like been like, it's okay, you're fine, and shove them down and not let them out. Being able to sit with them gives you, or at least in my experience and some people that I've talked to, it makes you feel like you have more control and more power over how you're feeling, as opposed to like all of these things just happening to you all the time. It gives you the ability to like make a change or let it go and feel better and realize that, okay, that is how I was feeling. And maybe you get to some of those like layers underneath, and okay, this is why I was feeling that. And this is what I can do about it, whether it's a person, whether it's a situation, whether it's, some sort of like subconscious thing that you're dealing with. But it really does empower you to know that you have agency. That's another big thing for me. You have agency to make this thing that's making you feel this way different. And just allowing yourself to do that gives you a lot of that like power back over it. And I think that that's so important, especially for a lot of people who, when those feelings are anxiety and anxiousness and things that just feel really hard to control. Yeah. So
I think that's so important. And I think like thinking about the emotional piece, and if we're just blocking it or telling ourselves we're fine, again, it doesn't go away. So I like visualize it literally as this, like, it's blocking my inner knowing. It's blocking my connection to myself. The fact that I'm carrying this thing around that I haven't let myself process or feel. So in the feeling of it, I love that you named it. Actually helps us feel more confident, empowered, clear on our knowing what we need, knowing what action to take. It's a way to also regulate, right? Like if we can move that emotion, it's like getting that block out of the way where we can actually connect to our intuition or our knowing or our needs and have clarity on what the next step is, as opposed to like feeling like we're moving on with our life, but there's still this underlying current of whatever that sensation was. That's really, it's kind of creating this like funky lens to how we're moving through the world, as opposed to getting that out of the way so we can feel more like us. I always say, like, bring more of yourself back online, like more of your true essence, knowing, intuition back online. And feeling your emotions can absolutely help us do that. So perfect point. I love that you added that.
Yeah. I think, that there's a lot more I feel like we could talk for another hour, but like I think when people are feeling stuck or they can't get out of a pattern, a lot of it has to do with just always compressing or like not letting things go or not, acknowledging, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but
I do too,
I think
baby. I think we could sit here for another hour for sure.
Yeah. But that's a great place to leave off, because I do want you to take a minute to tell people how they can find you, how people can work with you, what you have to offer, because I think these are all just fabulous things that really just everyone needs.
Yeah. So you could find me, as far as like social, I'm on like TikTok and Instagram and, on my website and LinkedIn and all the things, but I mostly live on Instagram. And it's just Boopbod, BOOPBOD. And I would love, even after listening to this, if there are any questions that come up or any aha moments, like to DM me. Like I love connecting with people in all forms. So like, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or you just want to share something. But that's like the easiest place to find me. And then as far as kind of next steps for anybody that's feeling called to lean in, I do have a few. So in the code podcast, if you use that code on these, you'll get 15% off. So feel free to do that for listening to this. It's a little treat from me to you. But if you're wanting to geek out on strictly the nervous system, I have something called the Nervous System Toolkit, which is, it's a self-guided program, but it is, again, that blend of the science, the somatics, and the spirituality pieces of like really recognizing the ins and outs of your nervous system, how it functions, why it does what it does, how brilliant it is, but also how it's probably functioning based on perceived threats versus real ones. It gives you some journaling prompts and workbook pages, as well as actual guided videos and audios to move through to help practice regulation. So it's really this like all-encompassing nervous system focus option. And then I also have my membership subscription, which is called the Hype Hub. And the Hype stands for Hone Your Power Every Day, like going back to having agency and recognizing how much power we do have to show up for ourselves and show ourselves what life gets to be like and feel like, and not live so dissociated or so kind of disconnected from ourselves. And so inside that, there's breath work, there's meditation, there's yoga flows, mobility, there's workouts, there's other things there. You can jump into the full thing. I also have a free trial if you want to test a couple things out before. And then the last one I'll just name is my one-on-ones. And you could do like a one-off session. I also have what I call my expansion 3-month container. So it's a 3-month session where we really get to dive into this unconscious work, the reprogramming work, the somatic work. It's like a lot of everything we were speaking to, kind of with that one-on-one love and support and really individualized experience. So, and if you have questions about any of that, again, please reach out to me. I'm so here to support you.
Amazing. It's been an awesome conversation. I appreciate you so much. I can't wait to share this. So thank you so much, Emily. It was great talking to you today.
Thank Kelly. This was so good. So fun.
Thank you so much, and have a great day, everyone. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. It's truly an honor to help bring these conversations to you. I do have a couple of quick favors to ask of you. While you're listening to an episode, could you take a screenshot and post that to your Instagram stories and tag me at Life Intended Podcast? And just let me know what your favorite takeaways were or what you liked about the episode. It really helps me to learn more about what you love and want to see more of. And if you have a few extra minutes, if you'd go to iTunes or wherever you listen, I'd love it if you could leave me a rating and review. Ratings and reviews are one of the best ways new listeners can find the show, and I'd love nothing more to grow this and help more people live a life intended. See you again here next week.